Metaphor ReFantazio is jam-packed with many different themes and characters with the wonderful backdrop of a creatively conceptualized world that truly captures fantasy. With that said, there is one sole character who represents the core themes and ideas of this game more than anybody else, and surprisingly, it's not the main character. The character who represents the core vision of Metaphor ReFantazio the most is Eupha, otherwise known as Eupha. In this video, I'll be explaining why this is true, and I'll additionally be exploring the deeper underlying meanings that can be found within her character. Let's head back to Uchronia and discuss. In an interview with Famitsu prior to Metaphor's release, its director Katsura Hashino said that the core theme in the story of Metaphor ReFantazio is ideals versus reality. Nobody embodies the struggle between these two concepts more than Eupha. You see, while the first word that comes to mind when I think of Eupha is wifey, the second and perhaps more objective word would be idealist. An idealist is defined as a person who is guided more by ideals than by practical considerations. Eupha's idealist nature permeates throughout her character and is perhaps the most omnipresent trait we see in almost everything she says. From her innocent putdown of Milo, where she's genuinely trying to understand what he's about in spite of his conniving scumbag nature having already been laid bare, to her grand commitment to sacrificing herself for her people without a second thought, Eupha's ideals largely come before practical considerations when she approaches situations. Allow me to clearly ascertain what exactly Eupha's ideals are before we continue. In my estimation, there are two words that form basically the entirety of Eupha's ideals, and they are empathy and grace. Empathy is described as the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. In other words, it's the capacity to willfully put yourself in somebody else's shoes before you cast judgments. It's the desire to seek out and then keep front of mind how somebody else's experiences can dictate their behaviors. Obviously, the greatest example of Eupha exhibiting this trait is how she accepted her role as Etria's sacrifice to the dragon god. In spite of the fact that from birth she was a living sacrifice with no choice or agency other than to die, she not only accepted it, but she held no reservations. Her empathy led her to place herself in the villagers' shoes and understand that they're just people who wanted to live and who believed that she was the only thing that could provide that to them through her sacrifice. There wasn't malice behind their wishes for her eventual death, but instead hopeful optimism. Now, she could have the empathy to commit herself to laying down her life for her village and then rightfully harbor hatred to the same village due to the unfair circumstances, but she doesn't, due to the other word that forms Eupha's ideals, that word being grace. Grace is defined as courteous goodwill. Now, bear with me here. Courteous equates to considerate, and to be considerate is to be careful not to hurt others. To have goodwill is to be friendly, helpful, and cooperative. So, Eupha's endless capacity for grace, or courteous goodwill, allows her to love her people in spite of the circumstances and to consider said circumstances a blessing because it's the power to save others. So, Eupha is the personification of empathy and grace. These are the ideals that guide Metaphor ReFantazio's biggest idealist. Now, at this juncture, it may seem like Eupha is cookie-cutter basic good girl. But remember, Metaphor ReFantazio's director Katsura Hashino said that the core theme surrounding this game's vision and narrative is ideals versus reality, and I'm claiming that Eupha embodies this concept. Now that we've established her idealist nature, let's get into how that clashes with reality. So one of the things about Eupha that I think makes her such a compelling character is that in spite of the fact that she's lived her entire life under the established dogma of Etria, she has the bravery of heart to choose instead to grow rather than remain stagnant in her beliefs. Like, honestly, most people do throughout their lives. You have to consider, Eupha has been indoctrinated her whole life. Not only that, but her ideals uphold the indoctrination. The indoctrination Eupha faces is that the priestess of Etria sacrifices themselves to the dragon god Et upon the slightest inconvenience to the village. Hurricane hits the island, sacrifice the priestess. Crops underperform, sacrifice the priestess. Fortin sends a bunch of people to loot your land, sacrifice the priestess. We are talking about hundreds of years of Etrian priestesses laying down their lives for the village. Not only that, but Eupha's parents died in a voyage to the temple of the dragon god, and the villagers largely claimed that the reason the sea took them was because they didn't uphold the traditions of the village. So Eupha's indoctrination is two-pronged in that hundreds of years of Etrian history seemingly support the indoctrination as truth, and also the tragic personal loss of her parents is considered by the islanders to also support the indoctrination as truth. In spite of all this, Eupha finds the strength to break free of the mental shackles that have constrained her people's worldview for centuries. Now, remember, an idealist is defined as a person who is guided more by ideals than by practical considerations. In the critical moment, Eupha displays tremendous growth in that she chooses to accept the evidence in front of her eyes rather than blindly stick to the self-sacrifice route. In other words, her archetype awakening is the first moment that she follows practical considerations primarily and her ideals secondarily. Now, if you've watched any of my videos on this game before, then you know what we do here is we peel back the layers of symbolism that the writers of Metaphor intended when they sat down and created this wonderful world and story. I think this is a good moment to stop and explore under the surface. Let me explain to you the deepest underlying layers of symbolism when it comes to Eupha's character. Obviously, when it comes to the Mustari at large, maybe the first thing that comes to mind is their mask. Most all Mustari wear masks when they are out and about in the world. The mask of the Mustari is a metaphor that represents how they as a people have willfully blinded themselves and chosen to follow a dogma that sacrifices the lives of innocent girls with great potential out of a warped sense of self-preservation for the many. The mask represents their willful choice to mask themselves from the rational consideration that the priestess's sacrifice is wrong. But with Eupha, the mask is meant to symbolize and represent even more than that. Something that caught my eye with Eupha is the unique design of her mask and the scenes in which we see her wearing the mask. Allow me to elucidate. Eupha's mask bears a striking resemblance to the chess piece, the pawn. Everything fell into place once I tracked this. You see, for those of you unfamiliar with chess, pawns have less movements available to them than any other chess piece on the board, and for the most part they can only move forward one square at a time. This parallels Eupha's role as priestess in how she has no agency in her life. She has less freedom than other people and she can only move forwards. With consideration to this, it would be fair to say that the pawn represents resilience. Pawns have the least agency and freedom, and yet they form the front line to protect others and march forwards to their death irrepressibly, which is the exact same as how Eupha marches towards her death for others. But here's the thing, pawns also represent progress and possess an unrivaled latent potential. You see, pawns are the only piece in chess that have the potential for promotion. When a pawn reaches the other side of the chessboard, it then has the power to transform into the strongest piece on the board, the queen. A queen is the only piece in chess that has the power to mostly make any movement on the board. In other words, they possess unrivaled freedom and agency. Are you following my meaning? Let me lay it all out for you. In Eupha's archetype awakening scene, her mask literally explodes, and it isn't just for the aesthetics. This is a deliberate representation and symbolization of her metaphorically reaching the other side of the chessboard and promoting from a pawn to a queen. In this moment, she has finally secured her first great triumph in her struggle with the core theme of this game, ideals versus reality. Eupha, the ardent idealist, has finally broken her indoctrination and made practical considerations without compromising her ideals. Her perseverance to continually march forward one square at a time has paid off, and she's no longer a pawn, but a queen. Don't believe me? As we know, royal archetypes are meant to be the truest reflection of the party's soul and ideals. The protagonist unlocks Prince once he realizes his true self, Hulkenberg unlocks Royal Knight, so on and so forth. Have a look at Eupha's royal archetype. You may have guessed by now, but it looks exactly like the chess piece of the queen. To finalize this line of thought, let me reiterate that Eupha's journey mirrors that of the pawn in chess perfectly. Not just hers, but all Etrian priestesses. Just like pawns on a chessboard, they move forwards and inevitably perish, always the first to be sacrificed for the sake of the rest of the board or their people. But Eupha was the pawn who managed to reach the other side. She persevered through hell and reached an enlightenment that allowed her to claim her birthright and become the most powerful Mustari who protects their people. She became the personification of the chess piece, the queen. If this isn't enough evidence for you, then I believe it would be appropriate to consider a Denny. After all, he is basically Eupha's older brother and parents roll into one with consideration to their parents' death. He's a core part of Eupha's character. Look at his mask. It quite clearly symbolizes and represents the castle piece from chess. This was a deliberate design choice because while castles can move many squares at a time, they are confined to only moving in straight lines. In other words, in spite of the fact that Denny is the leader of the village, he's confined by the villagers' beliefs and his own indoctrination and can only do so much in his efforts to protect his sister from her demise. He attempts a lot to protect her from her fate, but is only able to do so much. Additionally, if you don't know, castles were not just where royals resided, but a place in which people could retreat into to remain safe from war or attacking countries. A Denny, as the leader of the Mustari, is whom the people flock to and hide behind and beg to uphold their tradition. He is the safe space for the Mustari people, the one expected to assuage all worries and protect them. I want to address and clarify one more thing, and that is the fact that Eupha is Metaphor ReFantazio's real protagonist. Now, remember, Metaphor's director Kashino Hatsura stated that the core theme surrounding Metaphor ReFantazio is ideals versus reality. While you may now agree with me at this point that Eupha represents that struggle more than anyone, you might still hold reservations about me saying that Eupha is the game's real protagonist. Let me expound upon this notion. So, a lot of people hear the word protagonist and simply think it equates to main character or good guy in the story, but one of the definitions of protagonist is an advocate or champion of a particular cause or idea. When you take everything we've discussed into consideration, then it is clear that Eupha is the primary advocate or champion for the core vision and main themes of Metaphor ReFantazio, and thus it would be fair to say that she is the real protagonist of this game. Within the narrative itself, Eupha's own experiences most closely reflect the core theme of the game. There are many examples of this, but a great example that comes to mind is when Eupha meets Ovi's sick mother. She's quick to point out that she doesn't believe prayer alone can help those people. In other words, instead of clinging blindly to Sanctus ideals, they need to make practical considerations in order to actually heal the sick people. I want to end this character analysis with a quote, because I believe it deliberately states outright a lot of what we've been talking about. What's fascinating is that it isn't a big speech or monologue, but instead it's a seemingly throwaway comment. This quote reflects Eupha's growth and enlightenment, and for me it serves as such a perfect way to highlight that she is a queen and no longer a pawn. After you face down the elegy of the soul, Eupha says, "The true enemy is the mind that refuses to see the abstract complexities of the world around them." How perfect is that? Remember, an idealist is defined as a person who is guided more by ideals than by practical considerations. Eupha is essentially saying here that ideals are well and good, but if you don't have the capacity to perceive the abstract complexities, then you won't be able to properly achieve what you need to do. In other words, you need to let your ideals inform how you make practical considerations, not let them dominate to the point that you don't consider what is practical. When it comes to the core theme of Metaphor ReFantazio, the struggle of ideals versus reality, Eupha's ascendant journey of self-discovery beautifully encapsulated the theme. She's a wonderful character, and I really wanted to make this video to showcase that. I know the most alluring part of her character for probably over 90% of players is her cute, open, and honest affection for yourself as the main character, but there is way more depth to Eupha than how she pines for the player character. She's a whole entire complex character independent of that. And that is part of what makes Wifey so special. Okay y'all, so this video will be the first in a series where I hope to do a deep analysis of every major character in this game. Definitely feel free to comment which characters you want to see next, and I will take it into consideration. My people, I can't say it enough, thank you so much for watching. We are legitimately at the point where I feel like we have a really nice community here in our corner of the internet. I love chatting and connecting with you all, so much. So let's keep things going. If you're watching and you're not subscribed, come right in and join us. Hit subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. You all are the main reason I make these videos. If you enjoyed the video, please drop a like and let me know. Check out some other videos on my channel for more content like this, and have a great day, night, or morning, and remember to be kind and thoughtful. Peace.
I felt it to be a sort of miracle. I never thought I'd be involved in any way with followers of Sanctism. That's why I was so hesitant at first. When I found myself clashing with them, I became even more unsure of what was right. But then, that very unsurety is what turned out to be the most important feeling, did it not? Once I learned what frustrated me, what I refused to compromise on, I knew then who I really am at my core. It led me to a realization. I only want to live in a world where you exist.
I feel the same way as you, Eupha.
I can see what they're doing, what he's doing. I can see it, I feel it. He's cooking.
Do you mean I can stay by your side? Truly, you'll grant me something so special. It's all I could ask for. Just know that for me, no one could possibly replace you.